Wait just another minute here. Okay, let's get to it. Not too much on the formal agenda today. But if you didn't already see my messages about it, I am having trouble with the scanning app on my phone, so I've got to figure out some other way to get that vocab test up. I thought about just saying screw it and not worry about it, but I think I owe you guys the opportunity to have that one last good test grade because it can offset, some shortcomings on the MCQs we've done. So I don't really want to take that away from you. Hope that makes sense and sounds agreeable to you. I'll try to figure out some way to have that up, hopefully, by lunchtime. So just watch for that. Still, just do that today, and you can do the corrections tomorrow. And then the only other thing that we have going, besides obviously talking about the destructors in class today, is I'm going to put up a practice that will be an MCQ, just completion MCQ on APC, MCQ on APC tomorrow. Practicing the character setting and plot and structure skills that we've been doing. And then when we come back after exams, we'll kind of do one more short story and finish up the unit and do the MCQ FRQ assessments and then move on to a poetry unit. So that's what's going on. Regarding the exam, I think I'll just put up a generic time like 9 o'clock that I'll open it or something, and I'll have kind of more of a wide window. I'm not worried about everyone. No, Alex, yeah, I was just making jokes about that second bell big time. You distracted me now. I don't feel the need to do a big like Zoom meeting or anything just to do that, like, essay reflecting on virtual learning. So we'll just do that. But it's funny. It didn't even occur to me until I was having a discussion second bell, and all of a sudden I was talking about like the difference between being immoral and amoral, right? Is kind of the key to understanding the story, right? Because does anybody know the difference between those two things? It's kind of a subtle distinction.
I think immoral is having the wrong morals, while amoral is just not having any.
Exactly.
Being against morals entirely.
Yeah, or being amoral is kind of being more just kind of nihilistic, anarchistic, right? You don't even have a mission. You just want to blow things up and destroy, right? And then part of the key to the story, obviously, is this is, with the setting is what these kids grew up seeing, at least the results of, right? Even though it's 9 years after the end of World War II. And then we have all these people yesterday that, what were they really even trying to do other than like losing their minds? It was crazy. And they're in there. And then I don't know whether you saw the shots of all of them in there, but once they're in there, they didn't even really know what they're going to do. It's like everybody, they're just like picking up podiums and walking out with them and just kind of wandering around and like gaping around like this. It was the most bizarre day. I watched a lot of cable news yesterday. I'm sure a lot of you guys did too. It was after a while I had to just stop. But yeah, big time. Definitely some comparisons that could be made there. So let's get straight to that and at least kind of touch base on the questions. I'm going to try not to spend too much time on them because we'll end up probably talking about, answering a lot of those by what you write for these readers logs. I think the first question is actually a really good one. Who is the actual protagonist and antagonist of the story? I don't think there's one right answer here, but it's not as simple of a question as you get with a lot of stories, even though on some level, this does have a pretty linear, straightforward kind of quest type plot sequence, right? But still, it's not what you usually get with that, even if the structure itself is kind of like that. So what do you think? Protagonist, antagonist, main conflict? What are they in the story?
The protagonist is Trevor. And then the antagonist, I don't know, I thought maybe it was the house because that's the trying to stop or destroy.
Maybe it's what the house represents. Maybe the house is the symbol, right?
I had it just as like society in general, to be honest. Or at least society as a whole, but just There's definitely some sort of class thing going on
Yes.
there.
Right. And Mr. Thomas represents part of that, both in that maybe he was higher income. He, unlike
The
most,
bourgeoisie.
yeah, or aristocracy in this case, we would probably call it, right? And World War II did kind of tear down the remnants of the formal, there's always economic divisions, but the more kind of formal divisions of social classes to some degree. I mean, it definitely took it away a lot more than anything else, right? Because who's going to worry? Who's going to just consume themselves with just the the pure, just like shallow social lives of like aristocrats when everybody seems to have lost everything, right? It became a lot more important and a lot less respected. And you hear that in the description of the association of Trevor's name that he avoids using and uses T instead, because Trevor, that's, we might not understand that as much, but it pretty much explains it is more of an aristocratic name, right? And they would laugh at that because it's associated with a guy with a top hat and a monocle and a whole like British accent, right? And all that should be gone and blown up. So yeah, you're all right. I think the house is not wrong, but the house is a symbol, and the house has to do with upper class, and then art and beauty too. Like these kids don't feel like there should be such thing as art and beauty. That's silliness, right? There's nothing. There's a really interesting quote from Trevor that we can talk about eventually, but I'm going on and on here. Second question is just how is suspense created? I mean, I think that's pretty obvious, right? Like whether or not they're going to actually like bring the house down from the inside. There's something really funny that was kind of occurring to me that I thought about before and kind of occurred to me in the millisecond bell, is that there's a kind of literature that I would consider this, that Foster talked about, and how to read literature like a professor, a kind of like critical literary lens called deconstructionism. And that's when you view the characters in a story as not so much real people or characters at all, as much as they are just a product of their environment. They don't really have free will and decisions and the ability to like make themselves into something that they want to do, as much as everything they do and think and that they are is formed by where and when they were. And I think that's definitely what Graham Greene's trying to do with these kids here, right? It's like they're empty inside as a result of the setting that they grew up in, and they literally deconstruct something, right? So it's deconstructionist on a literal and figurative level. They destroy it from the inside out, and it falls down. Okay, about 3. The story uses the most common basic formula of commercial fiction. Protagonist aims at goal, confronted with various obstacles between himself and his goal, overcome the obstacles, and achieves his goal. And it feels like some kind of quest, right? Like Foster talks about, right? Except the part about maybe learning something about himself or themselves, because I'm not sure that really happens, right? Because they're not really thinking like that. So what do you think? Number 3. How is the story different from the commercial fiction, even though it uses that formula?
I said that all of the characters kind of ended up unsatisfied. Obviously, Mr. Thomas was like heartbroken, but the boys also, like, because they are so empty, like, yes, they accomplished what they wanted to accomplish, but like it didn't really change anything about who they were. And they didn't, like, even though they brought it down, they're still kind of at the same place that they were at the beginning of the story. And they never really moved or progressed. And they're just still kind of like the same empty characters that they were at the beginning.
Definitely agree. There's no
The end really didn't go long enough for us to figure out if they got the fame they wanted, but that wasn't really the point of the story.
Right.
It's just that their motivations were different from that of the leader.
Even if their reactions were nothing, we don't even get he doesn't even bother to show us nothing, right? We just have that weird, darkly comedic line at the end, which is also really strange. But yeah, there's no revelation or evolution or epiphany or anything like that you would get at the end of kind of a quest type thing. And I think that's on purpose, even though the structure seems to be moving towards that. Any particular things you notice about like the motivations of any of those? It takes a lot of different perspectives there. Do you understand kind of what happens between Trevor and Blackie, and the T kind of transforms the gang from what to what? On a literal level, what kinds of things were they doing before they take on this like monumental task?
It was just petty crimes, and it was essentially just a game. Well, it was a game anyway, but to them, the entire thing was a game.
Right.
That didn't really change. Yeah.
And kind of, and they seem to be lean toward, even though we don't see them do it, lean toward the idea of like maybe kind of stealing stuff, right? Like pinching rides. I mean, that's not literally stealing something, but you're getting away with, not paying for something and stuff.
I still find it interesting that they find stealing to be bad, but they don't give a second thought to destroying somebody's property.
Mm-hmm. Well, but at the same time, they're not stealing things for value, are they?
Yeah.
Because like, if anything, you would think to somebody who's like immoral, for instance, or was committing crimes, that the main motivation would be money or material possessions. But this is something different from that, right? They literally burn money, right? So that shows that kind of the nihilistic point of view that they have. It's almost like they want to just like finish destroying everything. Like they've seen, there's a phrase often associated with the story that destruction as a form of creation, right? And that's what they understand in their lives. And for all we're kind of like laughing about it because it's so strange and comic in a way, it really is like horribly sad. Like if you think of these kids like real people, and that there probably was kids very much like this that grew up and just were kind of empty inside because all they saw was destruction. They're surrounded by rubble, right? And 9 years after the war, this is something that's kind of hard to relate to for us. Even though none of us, including me, were even around at the end of World War II. If you were in England, you would at least have like, grandparents who could talk about that and stuff. We never had, with the exception of Pearl Harbor, outside the contiguous 50, we never were actually bombed, right? Nothing ever actually happened to our like home soil. But London had the crap bombed out of it, right? I mean, it was, in many parts were very much destroyed, right? And so that's a very different thing to have in your history. And here, this if you read the blurb at the beginning, it's 9 years after that. It took so long to rebuild and recover, and so many people were dead that a decade after, these boys have grown up. I mean, it says they're 9 or 10, and it's 9 years after the war. That's all I've ever seen. Is like rubble everywhere. So that kind of gives you a little bit more of an idea how this could happen. So that obviously that's number 5, right? The significance of this in post-Blitz London. We say Blitz, we mean Blitzkrieg. Like the significant bombing. Any other thoughts on 4? Just motivations of any of those? What about the lorry driver's reaction at the end? He actually says, "You have to admit it is pretty funny," or something like that, right?
I think it sort of reinforces the whole class, not really class warfare, but class conflict thing there. Because the whole description in that joke of a top hat, like as if it was a top hat and then it just collapsed, that reinforces the whole. Because he's not in any way related to the group of boys, but he has somewhat the same idea in that sense. So it's a more general class thing.
By has the same idea, you mean kind of represents the same idea?
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
They both felt similarly about the house in some ways.
At the same time, do they hate Old Misery? Trevor doesn't, right? There's a really interesting passage on 119. Kaylee, by the way, I'm so sorry I had you waiting out there. I thought I got you in before, and then I realized you weren't in. So apologies for that. He says, "I'd like to see Old Misery's face when we are through," T said. And then Blackie says, "You hate him a lot?" And he says, "No, of course I don't hate him. There'd be no fun if I hated him." The last burning note, and this is while they're burning the money. And then he says, this passage here, "All this hate and love, it's soft, it's hooey. There are only things, Blackie. Like there's no such thing as hate or love." That's where it shows you like how dead and empty they are inside. There's not good and bad, hate and love. That's just a bunch of nonsense. It doesn't exist, right? That's weird. What a thing for a kid to say, right?
I remember a while ago, well, relatively recently, I remember looking up the definition of psychopath versus sociopath, and Trevor surprisingly seems to, because the lack of emotions and not really not just lack of emotions, but being against emotions in a lot of ways.
Mhm.
And taking advantage, using the support of somebody else, of the group, to accomplish his own goals as almost a sort of experiment, because he doesn't seem to show many emotions in general.
Yeah, but that's different from, say, like a narcissist or something, right? Who really is after something stuff for himself and in true greed. This is different. It's not good. Maybe even more disturbing in some ways, but it's definitely very different. So good distinctions. Readers logs. We don't have too much more time, so I'd love to hear at least a couple before we go. Other things you notice about the plot structure and setting in general. Read it off your paper or paraphrase it, doesn't matter to me. Love to hear from some others of you.
I'll go first.
Cool.
Okay, so I'm gonna do the setting,
Uh-huh.
and then I didn't really put text. I just put in general. The setting takes place after World War II in the bombings. I said the story took place after the Blitz bombings. Many people lost their homes and all their belongings, and this may create an environment where the younger generation has a lack of interest in materialistic things like homes, which could result in the children, the gang, deciding to destroy the house, but then actually being sympathetic to Mr. What was his name? Johnson? No,
Thomas.
Mr. Thomas. So that could be a reason why they don't hate him, yet they don't care that his house got destroyed. And which would also back up the fact that Lori at the end says that this is quite funny, and he just laughs at Mr. Thomas with no empathy. He's usually that a house is someone's possession and is prized, yet they don't care at all.
Right. And some since everybody probably lost some stuff, why wouldn't you have sympathy or like you said, even empathy, right? But he doesn't. He just laughs, and that's kind of suggests he's kind of dead inside too, and it's just like this weird sense of humor left. Ariana, Trevor can't show emotions or weaknesses because of the facade he's doing. Like he comes from a posh background. He can't go by his name since it's too hoity-toity. Good word for it. They mocked him when he said please. Yeah. He's trying to be a hardened ruffian, so it makes sense why he has sociopath tendencies. Yeah, that's interesting because he does have to kind of try really hard to be something that they would respect. So in some ways, maybe it is kind of a facade. Interesting thought. Anybody else? Love to hear one or two more. Saw plenty of good thoughts when I was looking over these.
I can go.
Thank you.
My text was about when they were talking about the word beautiful and how that word belongs to a class world. And I was talking about setting and how environment provides a lot of information about the characters. And I said that the inclusion of these details where all the destruction takes place gives clues about Mr. Thomas's worldview and role in society. And words like beautiful, the paneling, and Wren, who was an architect, allude to the grandeur and age of this house and are kind of synonymous with Mr. Thomas in that he was like pre-war and was an aristocrat and had class, etc. And the boys resent the fact that his life was of class and beauty, and they kind of shut that out. And the description of the house also kind of mimics this contrast, and which matches the way that Mr. Thomas contrasts with the boys, where Mr. Thomas is old-fashioned and gullible. The boys are radical and serious, and there's just a pattern of contrasting things throughout the story that show pre-war and post-war tendencies and worldviews.
Yeah, good. Things like beauty in art and architecture and things like that. Those are things that can be appreciated when you have leisure time and relaxation time to be able to do that, right? I mean, even if some of us might think of something that we need, even during stressful times, music and things like that, it is a little bit easier to appreciate when you have some kind of life and your societies together, right? And it's interesting that Trevor initially points out that the house is beautiful. He actually, like you said, he actually uses those words, and everybody's like, "What? Like what? What do you mean? What does that mean? How does that have anything to do with our lives in our existence. But that shows, like, you know, like Ariana said before, that shows that Trevor does have some ability and mentality like that to be able to understand what beauty is, but he's, you know, maybe covering it up, you know, for the sake of doing what he's trying to do here. Okay, still got a few minutes. Anybody else? These are all very good thoughts. I feel like you guys really are actually getting a lot out of the story. It is kind of difficult.
So I'll do the one about setting too, and it's like environment that a character inhabits provides information about the character. So I was talking about Trevor. So like obviously Trevor, whether he's like born from wealth or not before the war, I don't know. But now he's like living in the underground with everyone else. So like the war-torn, like desolate environment is like obviously really symbolic of all of the like emotions of the people. Because if you think about it, like war is kind of like it's emotion filled, but also like destroys all emotion because it's like it's gonna just raise everything to the ground and like there's gonna be nothing left. So it's like really parallel to like everyone that's in the underground. They're all very void of emotion because of war. So like war like not only desolated everything physical, but also everything like emotional. So like that's why they don't care about taking down the house, because it's like everything's destroyed anyway and they don't have, and their emotions are destroyed. So it's just kind of empty.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Yeah, everything on the outside is destroyed and everything on their inside is destroyed. They destroy the inside of the house and then the outside of the house is destroyed too. All right, that's a good thought to leave it with. I do have a live session, fourth bell, so I got to go. Great discussion, guys. Thank you. And just look for the vocab test or a message about it, and we'll do that practice tomorrow. And that's a semester. Bye-bye.